A sea of grief-stricken faces stretched out before you, each one a canvas painted with sorrow, anger, and disbelief. The air is thick with the sound of muffled sobs and the palpable weight of unspoken questions. As you stand there, you feel the collective gaze of the mourners, piercing through you, each pair of eyes a silent accuser. Your heart feels like a lead weight in your chest, your breath shallow and ragged. The guilt gnaws at you, a relentless beat that is in tune with your racing heart. You can almost hear the echoes of their cries in your mind, their anguish amplifying the remorse and regret you carry. The knowledge that you were the catalyst for their pain is an unbearable burden, a shroud that seems to suffocate every breath and thought. The silence is deafening, punctuated only by the occasional wail of a broken heart. As you try to find the words, your throat tightens and a lump forms, making it nearly impossible to speak. You realize there are no words that can truly ease the suffering or absolve you of your actions. The weight of your deed hangs in the air, a heavy, invisible fog that cloaks the entire room, suffusing every moment with an inescapable sense of tragedy. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello, I am your host Kayla, and today we are talking about Aron Christensen, who at the age of 49 years old was camping and hiking with a large group of friends and his new puppy when he was killed under extremely suspicious circumstances. And the heart-wrenching events that happened after only add fuel to the fire of grief. Now, Aron was really just this quiet guy who didn't get himself into trouble. He was kind and loved nature and music. Aron was so kind that, as the saying goes, he never met a stranger, and this was, of course, highlighted by his new puppy, who he took with him everywhere he could, which was a 4-month-old Australian kettle dog that he named Buzzo. Aron was so happy to have Buzzo by his side. As many of you know, I myself am a dog lover, and I can attest that they make every adventure you take with them more grand. Or at least they're good for the plot. Aron was a bass player and had met his friend Urza Meredith about a decade prior, who was a recording engineer and producer, and they not only became great friends, but they also started producing some music together during that time through Cascade Record Pressing. In fact, according to his younger brother Corey, Aron wrote so many songs that he is still finding new ones today. But it wasn't just his love for nature, kind heart, or musical talent that drew others to Aron. He was always just in the moment. If you needed someone to listen, he would hang on every word you said. He was consistent and dependable, and growing up in Klamath Falls, Oregon, meant that he was very familiar with the Pacific Northwest and was fond of nature and the outdoors and the peace that it brought him. On August 19th, 2022, Aron and 16 friends decided that they wanted to take advantage of the nice weather and go on a camping trip near Wahlupt Lake in central Washington. Aron loved to spend time fishing and hiking, and this area is the perfect mix between those two. Wahlupt Lake is an incredible high-elevation campground that has a very well-known reputation, so there are always people frequenting the area. It is surrounded by Goat Rock's wilderness area and provides stunning views of the landscape and wilderness that you are surrounded by. There are rugged peaks, incredible meadows that are filled with wildflowers in the early summer, crystal clear lakes, and of course, the ever-present mountain goat. Nestled in Gifford Pinchot National Forest, Wallop Lake is about 384 acres in size, which makes it the second largest lake in the national forest, and fishing here often provides those manning the lines with an abundance of rainbow trout and cutthroat trout. You can take a boat out onto the lake, but the lake is not the only place to get your activities in at. There are multiple trails that you can hike, including Wallop Lake Trail number 101. Which follows along the northern edge of the lake. Following this trail, you will find yourself surrounded in greens of every shade as the leaves and foliage bloom, the pine trees sway in the breeze, and moss grows on anything it can cling to. The trail will actually take you onto the PCT, or Pacific Crest Trail, for a short time, and is a fairly rugged hike with challenging terrain and steep climbs and nearly vertical trails to climb down. The main part of the trail is 4.3 miles, or about 7 kilometers, but it can take you about 17 miles before looping you back onto another trail to bring you back to Wallop Lake, or you can treat this as an out-and-back style trail. The trail itself has almost 1,100 feet of elevation climb, with about 100 feet of descent, so you are definitely climbing higher until you decide to turn around. For Aron and his friends, this was just another day in the beautiful wilderness they called home. On this Friday, August 19th, Aron told his friends that he was going to hike the 101 and was planning to hike about 6.5 miles, where he intended to camp overnight and then hike back the following day, fully intending to be back by noon on Saturday. This is not uncommon behavior for him. As they had a large group of friends, Aron would often use these multi-day trips to take a night to be by himself. He had been doing this with this particular group of friends for years, maybe even decades. But his friends began to get worried when he didn't arrive, especially because they knew him to be a person who would do as he said he would, and he promised that he would be back in plenty of time to help cook dinner for the group that night. They had been planning to make burgers, which is the perfect camping meal for a summer night, and after a few more hours passed, their worries began to turn into fears, and then as they saw police at a nearby campground, their fears turned to dread. Aron's friend Urza was with the group and decided that it was time to let someone know that Aron was missing, and so he approached the deputies at the nearby campground. When he did, he kind of kept things simple at first and asked when it was the time to contact authorities when they think a friend of theirs is missing. So the deputy responded that he had to wait at least 24 hours and asked if their friend, Aron, was hiking alone. Urza then told him that Aron had been gone for more than 24 hours at this point, and that he was alone, but he also had his dog with him, and immediately the deputy's face turned grim. Despite this, many in the group thought that Aron was just running late, that maybe he had taken a wrong turn, or he stopped to fish and lost track of time. Whether it was innocence or denial, no one was thinking anything bad had actually happened to him. But things were not sitting right with Urza. Urza had a friend who died in a fall off of a cliff on a different camping trip about 5 years prior, which is why he approached the deputies in the first place. The rest of the group had cooked their burgers and began their annual cornhole tournament, but Urza just had this sixth sense about this. And this sense was confirmed when the deputy told Urza and his wife, Kate, who had approached them, that he, the deputy, was there to investigate a death. The report had come in at 3:55 p.m. on Saturday, August 20th, to the Lewis County Sheriff's Office. A hiker had found both Aron and Buzzo dead on the trail about 3 to 4 miles away. Aron and Buzzo were laying right next to each other, and the initial report stated that the hiker was only unconscious, but at 4:02 p.m., that statement was changed to deceased. But this hiker was not alone in finding Aron. A couple who were trail riding their horses through the area earlier that day saw Aron and Buzzo sleeping, and they were worried that the dog would jump up and bark and spook the horses, and so they had called out to let them know that they were there. The riders had originally set out at roughly 9 a.m., but it wasn't until they were on their return trip in the early afternoon that they saw Aron and Buzzo. When neither man or dog moved, the riders approached and found that the man and the dog were dead. They also saw blood on Aron's shirt, and when they used a stick to lift it, they saw, quote, a hole which seemed suspicious. In order for them to report this, they had to ride their horses back to the camp where they were staying with, and at that point, they contacted police. At this point, the police had already been informed by the hiker. Also, important to note, neither rider heard a gunshot while they were on the trail, and they had been out for several hours, which tells us that this happened either overnight or in the early morning hours. As the search of the area began, investigators found that the campsite was about 50 yards or 150 feet from the trail and was primitive in style near a dry creek bed, where there was a small flat area and several large logs that could be used for sitting. Aron was found lying on his back near the creek bed in what can be assumed was his bed for the night. He had a pack under his head to create a pillow and a blanket beneath him. His arm was draped over his head, and from what could be determined, Aron was likely sleeping on his side and then rolled onto his back shortly before his death. Buzzo still had his leash and harness on and was lying only a couple of feet away from Aron. Investigating closer, they found that there was some blood on the blanket and Aron had vomited. Aron had a puncture wound near his left rib cage, and based on what they found, they decided that this was not suspicious. And therefore, detectives were not needed, and the scene would not be processed any further. Aron and Buzzo were collected from the trail and transported to the trailhead by boat, and this was where Urza was asked to identify his friend, which he did. While here, he tried to look to see if there were any injuries or any clear indications that would explain what on earth happened, but he didn't see anything. There was very little evidence at the scene to lead investigators to a real conclusion, so initially the death was labeled as non-suspicious, and unfortunately, as we already mentioned, this meant that there would be no investigators called to the scene, no evidence was collected, and there was nothing done to preserve the area. But this, as it occasionally does, would change. As the coroner was investigating, she found that the puncture wounds on both Aron and Buzzo were actually gunshot wounds, and this was because she found a bullet lodged in Aron's body. And to add further confusion to the mix, the coroner also dated Aron's death on August 19th, which was the day that he had set out rather than the day he was meant to return. There were so many questions with this that investigators had, and of course, that Aron's friends and family had as well. The coroner had determined that Aron passed away, again on August 19th, due to a gunshot wound to the chest, and that this was a homicide. So what was initially a non-suspicious death suddenly became a case with priority. Aron had been murdered, and this left investigators scratching their heads. The scene did not indicate that there was a struggle at all. Nothing was awry, nothing was out of place. There didn't look to be a struggle in any way. The initial necropsy done on Buzzo, or an autopsy on an animal, showed that Buzzo had 2 small stab wounds that indicated that he had also been shot. The autopsy took place right away, and on August 26, 2022, Dr. Megan Quinn, who was the pathologist for Pacific Northwest Forensic Pathology, completed the autopsy on Aron. The autopsy had some confusing information that made investigators believe that Aron was not solely killed by the bullet. For example, they found trace amounts of THC, leading to concern that he could have been poisoned by laced marijuana, but this would later be disproven. There was also the fact that there was blood that pooled in the chest cavity, which led Dr. Quinn to believe that Aron had in fact, had a heart attack the day that he died, and that he had been having this heart attack for several hours, probably prior to him laying down. However, this does not diminish the fact that the bullet was the fatal injury as it struck vital structures. Aron would have survived for a time and could have survived if he was able to get medical attention in an appropriate amount of time. But without this help, death was inevitable. Now, here comes the frustrating part. Investigators here did not handle things as good as they could have. They thought right away that Aron died of this heart attack or maybe the drug overdose, and that the bullet didn't actually contribute to his death, that Aron potentially had already passed away when he was shot. I don't think that dismisses the fact that he was shot, though. On August 21st, the day after Aron had been recovered and before the autopsy was performed, Michael Osbach called police to report some information that his son had given him. So here's a very quick timeline for this very specific part. We have Aron found deceased, Michael calling, and then learning the cause of death was actually from this bullet. The information that Michael was providing was that his son Ethan, who was 19 or 20, depending on the source, and his 17-year-old girlfriend were hiking through this area to meet up with Michael, Ethan's dad, for a bear hunt at Sheep Lake. They were deep in the woods at about 9 p.m. when things began to happen. Ethan and his girlfriend had a 9mm pistol on them, and as they hiked, they became disoriented when they realized that they had taken a wrong turn. They were traveling only by the light of headlamps, which, if you are not familiar with headlamps, I just need to clarify that if you don't have one that's bright enough, it can actually make traveling and distinguishing things around you harder. From my own experience, my headlamp is definitely not bright enough to be walking around in the dark with, and it gives the ground and the surrounding area almost a holographic effect, and you can't really tell what's what. It's hard to get the depth perception, and just everything feels off. So there is potential that this is a factor that played into the events that happened. It was as Ethan and his girlfriend were crossing a dry riverbed that they heard growling and saw eyes glowing. It was late, it was dark, they didn't know where they were, and they were obviously spooked by everything that had already happened, and the growl made them fear it was a cougar. They first tried to make loud noises to scare off the animal, but when that didn't work, Ethan took off his pack, dug into it to pull out the pistol, and then shot a fire from his pistol in the direction of the growling animal, where there was a howl of pain and then silence. When the growling animal didn't come back and it was silent for an extended period of time, Ethan and his girlfriend carefully proceeded forward, where they found a man and a dog dead on the ground. And then they left without reporting what they saw or what they had done. It wasn't until the following day, when they had returned home and they told Michael what happened, that Michael decided the police needed to be notified. Michael then called the investigators and told them what had happened. So again, this is prior to the autopsy results. And once those were in, investigators were called to open an investigation. So the investigators had the information about what happened, and they still didn't do anything until the autopsy came back and said, yeah, this was a homicide. On August 31st, personnel returned to the site to search for clues or evidence, but found nothing of help. Again, this was 10 days after they recovered Aron's body, and 9 days after they received the information about what happened. A later search of the area, which included a 25 to 30 foot radius search or a 7.6 to 9.1 meter search around the central location from where Aron's body was found, was done with a metal detector, which found a variety of bullet casings and other objects that were buried for a long time, which indicated that they were not related to what happened with Aron. But it is as questions get asked that responses change. Ethan's girlfriend originally said that she did not approach the man and his dog and did not see them. And this then changed to that she did see them and that the man was blue when she looked at him, indicating that he had already passed. And again, headlamps, if they're not bright enough, they will distort whatever you're looking at, which could give pale skin the look of a blue tinge. But things were about to get worse for Aron's loved ones while they seemingly got better for Ethan. A search of the location of Ethan's cell phone confirmed what his story was. Communication about what happened was done as quickly as his father could convince him, and the gun that shot Aron was handed over to police. By all accounts, Ethan was cooperating with the police and with the investigators. The gun was confirmed to be the one that delivered the bullet that killed Aron, and further, after investigators looked at angles and heights, they concluded that the exit wound on Buzzo matched the height of the entry wound on Aron. So this explains how both Buzzo and Aron passed away at pretty much the same time. Buzzo was shot, the bullet entered Buzzo, exited Buzzo, and then entered Aron. In addition to the heights matching, dog DNA was found in Aron's body, further showing that the bullet passed through Buzzo and into Aron. The bullet had entered Aron's body in the lower part of his ribcage and traveled upwards, causing damage that would lead to Aron's death. Circling back to the necropsy done on Buzzo, initially there were 2 round marks that were found just under his front leg, which was thought to be both an entrance and an exit wound. And an x-ray of the area showed that there was no bullet or bullet fragments inside of the dog, but Dr. Quinn, who performed the initial exam on Buzzo, felt like she needed to know more information, and so they contacted Dr. Brandy Fay from Newcomb Valley Veterinary Services, which was hired to perform the necropsy, and she found that one of the 2 wounds under Buzzo's front leg was actually superficial and likely would have just been annoying to the dog. However, the second was devastating. The 1 centimeter in diameter puncture wound left behind a line of damage that no amount of care would have helped. The bullet had gone through Buzzo's chest cavity, entered the left lung, and then exited the lung and passed through Buzzo's heart. Buzzo would have mercifully died immediately. However, that was not the concerning part of Dr. Fay's report. She also found that there was no exit wound, and that the object would have had to come out the entrance. This indicates that what killed Buzzo was not a bullet at all, rather something that penetrated his lung and his heart and was then pulled from his body. And this directly contradicts all of the other evidence that has been collected. Because of this, a second necropsy was performed, this time by Dr. Ottman on December 6th. This time, though, Dr. Ottman shaved Buzzo's hair off and found an exit wound on Buzzo's right hip, which aligned perfectly with the entry wound and the damage done to the left lung and the heart. Feeling that the investigation was ineffective at best and that there was very little care for the grief that the family felt, when one member of Aron's family raised questions about Ethan, they were dismissed by the detective saying, quote, "He's a good kid with a good family." Which, maybe that's true. It can be true. But a good kid with a good family can also make a mistake that costs another family the loss of their loved one, their son, their brother, and a friend. There was mounting concern about the detective on scene who had insisted that Aron died from falling and stabbing himself with a stick in the fall, which then dismissed the detectives from the scene. He stated that this was not from a gunshot wound, and therefore there was no reason to investigate the site further. Then, in April of 2023, prosecutor Jonathan Mayer dropped the charges of manslaughter and animal cruelty and stated that he would not be charging Ethan with any crimes. The evidence collected just did not meet the minimums to be able to get a conviction for even a lesser crime of criminal negligence. But again, this would all soon change. Of course, though, these events were very unsettling to the family and friends of Aron, and unfortunately, this would end up needing legal action. Attorneys Lorenzo Leone and Pilar French were hired by the family in the lawsuit that was filed, stating, quote, Aron suffered severe pain and suffering before his death, and before he died, he watched his puppy die in the woods, alone and abandoned. Ethan and Michael simply walked free with impunity. Which impunity is basically saying that the person who committed the crime is exempt from punishment. But the family was pushing to have both Ethan and his 17-year-old girlfriend, whose name was not released due to the fact that she is a minor, charged with first-degree manslaughter and animal cruelty. Now, manslaughter in the state of Washington means that a person has recklessly caused the death of another person. It is a Class A felony and has a maximum sentence of life in prison and a $50,000 fine, or it can be any combination of the two of those. Eventually, like I mentioned, a lawsuit was filed on the 2-year anniversary of Aron's death, and it was a $3 million federal lawsuit against Ethan and his father. They included Michael, Ethan's father, on this because he was the one who gave the 9mm pistol to Ethan, which was then used to kill Aron. Michael had told Ethan to carry it in the woods on this day for protection. Washington has a law that prohibits those over the age of 18 but under the age of 21 from carrying a pistol outside of their home or business, and Ethan was in that age range where he was not allowed to carry the pistol. In addition to this, Aron's family endured months of authorities telling them that Aron had died from a heart attack, one that they called a widowmaker, when in fact it was the bullet that dealt the deadly blow. The first detective on the scene saw that there was a puncture wound and insisted that this was not suspicious, despite 2 other witnesses who reported finding Aron saying that they thought it was suspicious. And despite having essentially a confession from Ethan, prosecutors just flat out refused to charge Ethan with any crimes. In addition to this, the family's attorney filed a $20 million tort claim against Lewis County for their faulty and botched investigation. The lack of urgency and the insistence that the death was not malicious completely sabotaged a good and conclusive investigation from the very beginning. And this would delay the ability for the family to have closure and move forward with their lives. Many of us know that the legal system is atrociously slow. This means that the family has to live in these moments that their lives were forever altered for months, or in this case, years, until their fight for justice comes to a conclusion. Because investigators denied them a true and thorough case at the start, this process has been drug on for far longer than it needed to be. I would like to say, finally, that I do not believe Ethan set out into the woods to kill a person. I don't think when he removed the gun from his pack that he was intending to shoot a dog or, by extension, a person. And when he pulled that trigger, he had no idea that he was ending the life of not one but 2 beings. After all, he was just a child and one who was frightened when he realized what his actions did. But his delay in approaching the scene, which could have saved Aron's life, his delay in contacting authorities, and those delays are the root of the problem. His actions, which he performed on purpose, ended another person's life. But this does not dismiss his attempts to do the right thing. And this is one of those cases where there is just so much difficulty in balancing justice and forgiveness. There is no right answer, there is no punishment that is fitting, and there is no comfort for the family and friends of Aron. As always, I appreciate you for being here. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.